It all started with a text message that seemed harmless at the time. I was gathering my things to leave the office when my phone lit up. "Can you stop by my office before you go?" Mr. Davidson had written. The building was nearly empty, most of my coworkers having left hours ago. I glanced at his door down the hallway, a thin line of light visible beneath it. "Sure," I replied, heart quickening slightly as I set my bag back down. We'd been working together for 3 years, but never had he asked to see me alone after hours. As I walked toward his office, my heels echoing in the silent corridor, I noticed my palms were damp. I knocked lightly, heard him say "come in," and pushed the door open to find him standing by the window, holding something I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. The text message came through at 9:47 p.m., just as I was settling into my evening routine. The soft ping from my phone seemed innocent enough, but when I saw my boss David's name flash across the screen, my heart skipped a beat. "Emma, I need you to come to the office tonight. Important matter to discuss. Can you be here by 10:30? I stared at the message, reading it twice to make sure I understood. My name is Emma Hayes, 28 years old, and I've been working at Preston Marketing for 3 years now. Never once had I been called to the office this late. My mind raced with possibilities. Was I in trouble? Was I about to be fired? Had I made some catastrophic mistake on the Harrington account? I glanced at myself in the mirror. I was already in my comfortable pajama pants and oversized college t-shirt, my blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, makeup long since washed away. This can't be good, I murmured to myself. On my way. Is everything okay? I texted back, trying to keep my tone professional despite the anxiety building in my chest. His response was almost immediate. Nothing to worry about. Just need your input on something time-sensitive. The vagueness didn't ease my concerns, but David had always been a straightforward boss. If he said it wasn't something to worry about, I wanted to believe him. I quickly changed into something more appropriate, black slacks and a navy blouse that I'd worn earlier in the week. Professional enough for an unexpected meeting, but not so formal that it would seem like I was trying too hard. I reapplied some light makeup, just enough to look put together, and let my hair down, running my fingers through it to give it some semblance of style. The drive to the office was surreal. The streets were quiet, the kind of peaceful emptiness that only exists in the late evening hours. Rain had started to fall, creating a gentle patter against my windshield and casting blurry halos around the streetlights. My mind continued to spin with possibilities, each one more concerning than the last. Preston Marketing occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise. At this hour, the parking garage was nearly empty, my footsteps echoing as I made my way to the elevator. The security guard nodded at me with mild surprise but didn't question my presence. David must have called ahead. As the elevator climbed to the 27th floor, I checked my reflection in the mirrored walls, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. Why was I so nervous? David had always been fair, even kind. In the 3 years I'd worked under him, he'd never been anything but professional, if a bit distant. Yet something about this late-night summons felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't name. The elevator doors slid open to reveal our darkened reception area. Only the emergency lights illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the familiar landscape of desks and conference rooms. The entire floor seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "In my office, Emma," David's voice responded from down the hallway. I made my way toward his corner office, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Through the glass walls, I could see that his office was dimly lit, just his desk lamp casting a warm glow over the space. My heart pounded as I approached, hand hesitating for just a moment before I knocked on his door. "Come in," he said. I took a deep breath and turned the handle, completely unprepared for what waited on the other side. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one, and don't forget to watch this video till the end and like the video because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. I've always been the reliable one, the person who gets things done without drama or fuss. That's what made me good at my job as a senior account manager at Preston Marketing. I handled our biggest clients with a precision that had earned me a reputation for excellence, though not necessarily for warmth. My colleagues respected me but didn't really know me exactly how I preferred it. Growing up in a small town with parents who expected perfection had shaped me into someone who lived by the rules. I graduated top of my class, landed a prestigious internship, and climbed the corporate ladder methodically. My apartment was immaculate, my clothes perfectly pressed, my life organized down to the minute. The only thing missing was someone to share it with. My last relationship had ended 8 months ago when Kevin decided he needed more spontaneity in his life. "You're too predictable, Emma," he'd said as he packed his things. "I always know exactly what you're going to say before you say it." His words had stung more than I cared to admit, perhaps because there was truth in them. Since then, I'd thrown myself even more deeply into my work. Preston Marketing had become my refuge, a place where my methodical nature was an asset rather than a liability. And at the center of that world was David Preston himself. David was 42, the youngest CEO in the company's history. He'd built Preston Marketing from a small local agency into a regional powerhouse through sheer determination and brilliant strategy. Tall with salt and pepper hair that seemed premature for his age, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his own worth without needing to prove it to others. Unlike other executives I'd worked with, David never raised his voice, never had to. When he spoke, people listened. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, like your thoughts and opinions genuinely mattered to him. It was a rare quality in our industry, and one that inspired fierce loyalty among his employees, myself included. I'd been drawn to his leadership style from the beginning. Though he rarely gave compliments, when he did, they felt earned, meaningful. "Excellent work on this, Emma," he'd say, and those simple words would carry me through weeks of long hours and demanding clients. There was something about his approval that just felt different, more valuable somehow. David was married, of course. His wife Catherine was a pediatric surgeon, brilliant and beautiful. They had 2 children, teenagers I'd seen in the framed photos on his desk. The perfect family, at least from the outside. But lately, I'd noticed a change in him. The photos had disappeared, replaced by meaningless corporate awards. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he'd been staying at the office later, sometimes long after everyone else had gone home. "Everything okay?" I'd asked once, catching him staring blankly at his computer screen well past 8 p.m. He'd looked startled, as if he'd forgotten he wasn't alone. "Just busy," he'd replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You should head home, Emma. No need for both of us to be here all night." But I'd stayed, ordering takeout and helping him prepare for the next day's client meeting. We'd worked in comfortable silence, breaking it occasionally to discuss strategy or share an insight. It had felt natural, comfortable. That was 2 weeks ago, and things had been different between us since. A new awareness, a subtle shift in energy that I couldn't quite define but could definitely feel. Now, standing outside his office at nearly 10:30 at night, I wondered if that evening had somehow led to this moment. Had I crossed a line without realizing it? Or was there something else entirely going on, something I couldn't even begin to imagine? Whatever awaited me on the other side of that door, I knew my carefully ordered life was about to change. I just didn't know how. Preston Marketing wasn't just a workplace, it was a carefully balanced ecosystem. On the surface, everything ran with precision, clients were managed, deadlines were met, campaigns were launched. But beneath that professional veneer ran currents of ambition, jealousy, and politics that shaped every interaction. Our office occupied 3 floors of the downtown high-rise. The 25th floor housed the creative team, designers, writers, and videographers who kept unusual hours and dressed like they were perpetually at a hip coffee shop. The 26th floor was account management, my domain, where the dress code was business casual and the atmosphere buzzed with the energy of client calls and strategy sessions. The 27th floor, where I stood now, was executive territory, spacious corner offices, a boardroom with sweeping city views, and of course, David's domain. My position as senior account manager placed me in an interesting middle ground. I wasn't part of the executive team, but I had more access to them than most. The other account managers, Jackson, May, and Taylor, were technically my peers, but everyone knew I handled the most prestigious clients. Teacher's pet, Jackson had once muttered when I was chosen to lead the pitch for Harrington Industries, our biggest potential client to date. The comment had stung, but I'd ignored it. Results spoke louder than office gossip, and when we landed the Harrington account, even Jackson had grudgingly congratulated me. May was different, brilliant and driven. She was the closest thing I had to a friend at work. David clearly trusts you, she'd observed over lunch last month. That's why people talk. They're jealous. There's nothing to be jealous of, I'd replied, picking at my salad. I just put in the hours. May had given me a long look. If you say so, she'd said, her tone suggesting she thought there was more to it. Was there more to it? I'd asked myself that question more frequently in recent weeks. David had been singling me out for special projects, seeking my opinion in meetings, finding reasons for us to work late. I'd told myself it was professional development, that he was grooming me for a promotion to the executive team. But there had been moments, a lingering gaze, a hand on my shoulder that stayed just a second too long, that made me wonder if something else was developing. The executive floor was particularly tense lately. Rumors of a potential merger had everyone on edge, wondering whose position might become redundant. David's assistant, Vanessa, had become increasingly protective of his schedule, eyeing me suspiciously whenever I needed to speak with him. He's very busy, she'd say, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her keyboard. I'll let him know you stopped by. But when David would spot me walking away, he'd often call out, Emma. Come on in. I've got a few minutes. The look on Vanessa's face in those moments was cold enough to freeze water. Even more complicated was my relationship with Rachel, our HR director. A close friend of Catherine's, David's wife, Rachel watched the interactions between David and female employees with hawkish intensity. More than once, I'd caught her studying me during company events, her eyes narrowing when David and I would fall into easy conversation. The Henderson project had only intensified the scrutiny. For the past 3 weeks, David and I had been working closely to salvage a campaign that had gone off the rails when the client suddenly changed their product launch timeline. Late nights, weekend strategy sessions, constant text messages, all perfectly professional, but enough to raise eyebrows. You've been putting in a lot of hours with David, Rachel had commented yesterday, cornering me by the coffee machine. Everything okay with the Henderson account? Just some timeline challenges, I'd replied, keeping my voice neutral. We're making progress. Rachel had nodded slowly. Just remember, Emma, this company has very clear policies about professional boundaries. The implication in her words had left me flustered and defensive. There was nothing inappropriate happening between David and me. Was there? Now, as I stood outside his office in the darkened building, Rachel's warning echoed in my mind. What exactly had David called me here to discuss that couldn't wait until morning? And why did it feel like every step I took toward his door was carrying me further from the safe, predictable life I'd built for myself? I pushed open the heavy door to David's office, my pulse quickening as it swung silently on well-oiled hinges. The space before me was transformed from its daytime efficiency into something more intimate. The overhead lights were off, leaving only his desk lamp to cast a golden glow across the room. Rain pattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights beyond blurred into impressionist smudges of color through the water-streaked glass. Emma, thank you for coming on such short notice, David said, rising from behind his desk. My breath caught slightly. He wasn't in his usual impeccable suit. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a charcoal Henley that hugged his athletic frame, sleeves pushed up to reveal tanned forearms. I'd never seen him dressed so casually at the office, and the effect was disarming. Of course, I replied, trying to keep my voice professionally neutral. The Henderson presentation is tomorrow. I assumed that's why you needed me. He smiled, a tired expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. The Henderson presentation is perfect. You've made sure of that. I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that the reason for my late-night summons remained unexplained. Then, please, sit, he gestured toward the seating area in the corner of his office, a sleek leather couch and 2 armchairs arranged around a low table. I hesitated briefly before choosing one of the armchairs, placing my bag neatly beside me. To my surprise, instead of taking the other armchair, David settled onto the couch closest to where I sat. It was then that I noticed 2 wine glasses on the table, alongside an open bottle of red wine. My eyes flickered to them and back to David, a silent question in my gaze. "I hope you don't mind," he said, following my glance. "I thought we could both use a moment to decompress. The last few weeks have been intense." Warning bells rang faintly in my head, but I quieted them. This was David Preston, my boss, a man I respected. There had to be a legitimate reason for this unusual meeting. Still, I couldn't ignore the subtle shift in atmosphere, the way the air between us seemed charged with something unfamiliar. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to steer us back to safer ground. "With the company, I mean." David sighed deeply, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. The gesture was surprisingly vulnerable, at odds with his usual composed demeanor. "The company is fine. Better than fine, thanks in no small part to your work." He leaned forward to pour wine into both glasses, then offered one to me. Our fingers brushed as I accepted it, a fleeting contact that shouldn't have registered but somehow did, sending a small jolt through me that I tried desperately to ignore. "Then why am I here?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back against the couch, swirling the wine in his glass as he studied me with an intensity that made me feel both exposed and elevated. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the gentle rhythm of rain against glass and the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. "Emma," he finally said, my name sounding different somehow in the quiet of the darkened office. "Have you ever reached a point in your life where you've done everything right, followed every rule, achieved every goal you set for yourself, and still found yourself empty?" The question caught me off guard. This wasn't a business conversation, this was something personal, something that crossed the carefully maintained boundary between our professional relationship and something else entirely. I should have deflected, should have guided us back to safer topics. Instead, I found myself nodding, the truth of his words resonating too deeply to deny. "Every day," I whispered, and took a sip of wine to steady myself. The admission hung between us, changing the texture of the air. I hadn't meant to be so honest, hadn't intended to reveal that crack in my carefully constructed facade. Yet something about the dim light, the rain-washed windows, and David's unexpected vulnerability had loosened the tight control I normally maintained over my words. "I thought it was just me," David said, his voice low and intimate. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, wine glass dangling from his fingers. "You always seem so certain. Like you know exactly where you're going." I laughed softly, the sound slightly bitter even to my own ears. "That's the goal, isn't it? To seem like I have it all figured out." "And do you? Have it all figured out?" I took another sip of wine, feeling its warmth spread through me. "About as much as you do, apparently." His smile in response felt genuine, the first real one I'd seen from him in weeks. It transformed his face, softening the lines of stress around his eyes, making him look younger, more approachable. "Not my boss in this moment, but simply a man. You know," he said, "in all the time we've worked together, this might be the first honest conversation we've had." He gestured between us with his free hand. "No pretense, no professional masks." "We're still at the office," I pointed out, trying to re-establish some boundary, even as I felt it slipping away. "True. But it doesn't feel like it tonight, does it?" He was right. The familiar space had been transformed by darkness and rain into something more intimate, almost confessional. The usual bustling energy of the workday had been replaced by this strange, suspended moment where normal rules seemed distant and hazy. David rose from the couch and moved to the windows, his silhouette outlined against the city lights beyond. "Catherine and I are separating," he said abruptly, his back still to me. "She moved out last weekend." The revelation stunned me into silence. I had suspected things weren't perfect in his marriage, the disappearing photos, the late nights at the office, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that sent my thoughts spinning. I'm sorry, I finally managed, unsure what else to say. He turned back to face me, leaning against the window. Are you? The question caught me off guard. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? David studied me in a way that made me feel transparent, as if he could see straight through to thoughts I barely acknowledged to myself. Because I've seen how you look at me when you think I don't notice, Emma. My breath caught, heat rushing to my face. I set my wine glass down carefully, needing something to do with my suddenly trembling hands. David, I don't, it's okay, he interrupted gently. Because I'd been looking back. The confession hung in the air between us, impossible to ignore or take back. I should have been shocked, should have been planning my exit, reminding him of company policy and professional boundaries. Instead, I felt something uncoil inside me, a tension I'd been carrying for months without fully recognizing it. This isn't why I asked you here tonight, he continued, moving away from the window, closer to where I sat. I needed to talk about the Anderson acquisition. But now that you're here. He paused, his eyes holding mine. I'm finding it hard to remember why I thought anything else was important. He extended his hand toward me, an invitation rather than a demand. Come look at the view, he said softly. The city is beautiful in the rain. I hesitated only briefly before placing my hand in his and rising to my feet. His palm was warm against mine, the contact sending a current of awareness up my arm. As I stood, we were suddenly close, close enough that I could detect the subtle scent of his cologne mingled with the faint earthy smell of rain. David, I whispered, not pulling away, what are we doing? He didn't answer, just led me to the window, our hands still joined, we stood side by side at the window, the city spread before us like a glittering tapestry. Raindrops chased each other down the glass, distorting the lights into wavering streaks of color. David hadn't let go of my hand, and I hadn't pulled away. The contact between us felt like a live wire, humming with dangerous potential. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, his voice low. I come here sometimes after everyone's gone home. Just stand and watch the city breathe. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My heart was racing, and I knew I should step away, create distance, remind us both of the professional relationship we were supposed to maintain. But I remained where I was, acutely aware of his presence beside me. Do you know why I really asked you here tonight, Emma? David asked, finally turning to face me. His expression was hard to read in the dim light, but his eyes seemed to search mine for something. The Anderson acquisition, I said automatically, clinging to the professional explanation he'd mentioned earlier. The small smile played at the corners of his mouth. That's what I told myself. A convenient excuse. He reached up slowly, giving me time to move away, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered, tracing the curve of my jaw. But I think we both know that's not the whole truth. I should have stepped back. I should have reminded him of the company's strict policy against workplace relationships. I should have thought about Rachel in HR, about the whispers that would follow if anyone found out. Instead, I found myself leaning slightly into his touch, my eyes fluttering closed for just a moment. We can't do this, I whispered, even as everything inside me yearned toward him. Can't? Or shouldn't? David's voice was gentle, but there was an undercurrent of something more intense. His hand moved to cup my cheek. There's a difference, Emma. I opened my eyes to find him watching me with a hunger that took my breath away. The professional mask had slipped entirely, revealing a desire that mirrored my own, one I'd been denying for months. I've been fighting this for so long, he continued. Telling myself it was inappropriate, unprofessional. That I was imagining the connection between us. But I wasn't, was I? The question hung in the air, demanding an honesty I wasn't sure I was brave enough to give. But standing there in the darkness, the city lights are only witnesses, the truth slipped out. No, I admitted. You weren't imagining it. He moved closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. If you want me to stop, tell me now, he said, his voice rough with restraint. We can go back to our professional relationship. We can pretend this night never happened. It was the escape I needed, the chance to retreat to safety. But the thought of returning to the careful distance we'd maintained, pretending I didn't feel this pull between us, suddenly seemed impossible. More than that, it seemed like a kind of death, a surrender to the predictable, rule-bound life that had left me feeling empty. "I don't want you to stop," I said, the words barely audible. David's eyes darkened. He closed the remaining distance between us, one hand sliding into my hair while the other moved to the small of my back, drawing me against him. For one breathless moment he paused, his face inches from mine, giving me one last chance to pull away. I didn't take it. His lips met mine with a hunger that matched my own, a desire that had been building for months finally finding release. I melted into him, my hands clutching at his shoulders, anchoring myself as everything I thought I knew about myself and my life tilted on its axis. The kiss deepened, his tongue exploring my mouth as his hands pulled me tighter against him. I could feel the solid warmth of his chest, the surprising strength in his arms. This was nothing like the careful, controlled interactions we'd had before. This was raw and real and overwhelming. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, David rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that since the day you challenged my strategy in the Harrington meeting," he confessed, a smile in his voice. "That was almost 2 years ago," I said, surprised. "I know." His thumb traced my lower lip, still sensitive from his kiss. "I've been very patient." I laughed softly, the sound tinged with wonder at how quickly everything had changed. But as the initial rush began to fade, reality started to creep back in. "David," I said, my voice steadier now, "what happens next?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Whatever we want to happen," he said, his hand still holding me close. "But not here. Not tonight. This is too important to rush." Relief and disappointment warred within me. Part of me had already imagined where this might lead, the couch just feet away, the desk where we'd spent so many professional hours. But the other part, the part that had always played by the rules, was grateful for his restraint. "Come to dinner with me tomorrow," he said. "Somewhere away from all this. Somewhere we can talk properly." "People will see us," I warned. "I don't care," he replied simply. "Do you?" It was a question that required more thought than I could give it in this moment, with the taste of him still on my lips and my body still humming from his touch. But one thing was clear, there was no going back to before. "No," I said finally. "I don't care." His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Then it's settled." He kissed me once more, gently this time, a promise rather than a demand. "Tomorrow." As he stepped back, putting professional distance between us once more, I realized that walking through his office door tonight had changed everything. Whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again, and strangely, that thought didn't frighten me at all. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived that moment by the window, David's lips on mine, his hands drawing me closer, the way everything had shifted in an instant. But with the light of day came doubts that had been easy to ignore in the darkness of his office. What was I doing? David was my boss, the CEO of the company, a man who held my career in his hands. Even if his marriage was over, even if the attraction between us was mutual, this was dangerous territory. I'd spent years building my professional reputation. Was I really willing to risk it all for a man who, until last night, had just been my boss? I stood in the shower, letting hot water cascade over me as I tried to think clearly. The smart thing would be to call it off, to tell David we'd made a mistake. We could blame it on the wine, the late hour, the emotional vulnerability of his revelation about his marriage. We could go back to being what we'd always been, colleagues who worked well together, nothing more. But even as I assembled all these sensible arguments in my head, my body remembered his touch, the taste of his lips, the way he'd said my name. I'd never wanted anyone the way I wanted him, never felt so completely seen by another person. The thought of pretending that kiss had never happened made my chest physically ache. "This is insane," I told my reflection as I applied makeup with less than steady hands. "You can't do this." But I was already choosing my outfit with more care than usual, selecting a deep blue dress that I knew brought out my eyes, a delicate gold necklace that drew attention to my collarbone. These weren't choices for a woman who intended to call things off. The office was its usual bustling chaos when I arrived, the creative team arguing over the latest mock-ups for a sportswear brand, account managers on calls with clients, interns rushing between departments with coffee orders and printouts. No one seemed to notice anything different about me, even though I felt like I must be radiating the memory of last night from every pore. I made it to my desk without incident, trying to focus on the day's tasks. The Henderson presentation was in 2 hours, and I needed to review my notes one last time. But concentration proved impossible. Every time the elevator dinged, I looked up, wondering if it was David. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, thinking it might be a message from him. When May stopped by my desk, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "You okay?" she asked, eyebrow raised. "You seem jumpy." "Just nervous about the Henderson presentation," I lied, shuffling papers on my desk to avoid meeting her eyes. "Please. You could do that presentation in your sleep." She leaned against my desk, studying me with suspicious intensity. "Something else is going on." I forced a laugh. "Just didn't sleep well." Before she could press further, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced down to see David's name on the screen. "Looking forward to tonight. 8 p.m. at Riviera. I'll send ACAR.my." Stomach fluttered. Riviera was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, intimate, romantic, and very public. If anyone from work saw us there would be no mistaking it for a business dinner. "Earth to Emma," May said, waving a hand in front of my face. "Who's that from?" "You're blushing." "No one," I said quickly, too quickly, flipping my phone over. May's eyes narrowed. "Uh-huh. No one but making you blush like a teenager." "Interesting." When she finally left, I sat staring at David's text, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to cancel, to retreat to the safety of professional boundaries and clear rules. But another part, the part that had responded so eagerly to his kiss, the part that had felt more alive in his arms than I had in years, was already composing a reply. "Looking forward to it," I texted back. With just those 4 words, I felt like I'd crossed a line from which there was no easy return. I glanced toward the executive floor, wondering if David was in his office, if he was thinking about me the way I was thinking about him. The internal conflict was exhausting, the thrill of what was happening warring with fear of the consequences, desire battling with self-preservation. But underneath it all, impossible to ignore, was the simple truth: I wanted him. And for the first time in my carefully planned life, I was willing to risk everything to have what I wanted. The Henderson presentation went perfectly. Our strategy was approved unanimously by the client team, with particular praise for the marketing calendar I'd developed. Throughout the meeting, David maintained his usual professional demeanor, his comments focused entirely on the business at hand. Only once, when passing me the presentation remote, did his fingers brush against mine in a way that couldn't have been accidental. The brief contact sent a jolt through me that I struggled to conceal. As the client team filed out, David addressed the room. "Excellent work, everyone. Emma, could you stay behind to discuss next steps?" His voice gave nothing away, but my pulse quickened nonetheless. The conference room emptied quickly, leaving us alone. David closed the door, then turned to me with a smile that transformed his face from CEO to the man who had kissed me so passionately the night before. "You were brilliant in there," he said, moving closer. "Just doing my job," I replied, attempting to maintain some professional distance despite the electricity I could feel building between us. "Is that all it was?" He was standing in front of me now, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Because from where I was sitting, it looked like more than that. It looked like passion. I swallowed hard. "David, we're at work." "I know." His eyes held mine, intense and unwavering. "But I haven't been able to think about anything but you all day." Before I could respond, his lips were on mine, his hands drawing me against him. Any resistance I might have offered melted away instantly. I kissed him back with an urgency that surprised even me, my fingers tangling in his hair as if I could somehow pull him closer than was physically possible. The risk of discovery only heightened every sensation, the softness of his lips, the strength in his arms as they wrapped around me, the heat building between us. This wasn't the tentative, questioning kiss of last night. This was desire unleashed, made more intense by the danger. David backed me against the conference table, lifting me slightly so I was perched on its edge. His hands moved to my waist, then slid upward, tracing the curve of my ribs before brushing the sides of my breasts through my dress. I gasped against his mouth, my body arching toward his touch. "We shouldn't be doing this here," I whispered, even as my legs parted to allow him closer. "I know," he murmured against my neck, his breath hot on my skin. "Tell me to stop." But I couldn't. Every rational thought had been driven from my mind, replaced by a need that seemed to consume me from the inside out. I pulled him back to my mouth, kissing him deeply as his hands continued their exploration. The sudden knock on the door was like a bucket of ice water. We sprang apart, David turning away to adjust his tie while I smoothed my dress with trembling hands. "Come in," David called, his voice remarkably steady. Vanessa, his assistant, opened the door. Her eyes moved between us, lingering on my flushed face and slightly mussed hair. "Your 2 o'clock is here," she said, her tone neutral but her gaze suspicious. "Thank you, Vanessa. I'll be right there." David turned to me, professional mask firmly in place. "Email me those metrics we discussed, Ms. Hayes." "Of course, Mr. Preston," I replied, gathering my presentation materials with hands that weren't quite steady. As I walked past Vanessa, I could feel her eyes on me, assessing, judging. Had she guessed what we'd been doing? The thought sent a wave of embarrassment through me, followed quickly by a thrill that was harder to explain. The secret knowledge of what had almost happened, of what would happen later, was like a fire in my veins. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept returning to the conference room, David's hands on my body, the way he'd looked at me, the hunger in his kiss. The line we'd crossed couldn't be uncrossed. We were no longer just boss and employee with an attraction. We had acted on that attraction, and nothing would be the same. My phone buzzed with a text from David, "Still 8 p.m. I can't wait to have you all to myself." As I stared at those words, I knew that tonight would change everything. And despite all the reasons I should be terrified, all I felt was anticipation. The morning after our dinner at Riviera was surreal. I walked into the office with David's taste still on my lips, the memory of his hands on my skin, the sound of his voice whispering my name. We had spent hours in his penthouse apartment, exploring each other with a hunger that seemed impossible to satisfy. It should have felt wrong, he was my boss, after all, but nothing in my life had ever felt more right. Now, standing in the elevator surrounded by colleagues heading to their normal workday, I felt like I was living in two worlds simultaneously. In one, I was Emma Hayes, senior account manager, focused and professional. In the other, I was a woman consumed by a passion I'd never experienced before, counting the hours until I could be alone with him again. The doors opened at the executive floor, and David stepped in with a few of the board members. His eyes met mine briefly, a secret smile playing at the corners of his mouth before he turned to continue his conversation about quarterly projections. No one would have guessed that just hours ago, he had been whispering promises against my skin as we moved together in his bed. "Morning, Emma," he said casually as the others nodded in my direction. "Good morning, Mr. Preston," I replied, proud of how steady my voice sounded despite the heat rising to my cheeks. I exited at the next floor, feeling his eyes on me as I walked away. The day stretched ahead, filled with meetings and calls and all the usual tasks, but now there was an undercurrent of anticipation that made even the most mundane work somehow thrilling. At my desk, I found a folder with a note attached, "Need your input on these projections. My office, 3 p.m. DP." His handwriting was bold and decisive, just like everything else about him. I tucked the note into my pocket, where I could touch it throughout the day like a talisman. May stopped by mid-morning, perching on the edge of my desk as usual. "So? How was your mysterious date last night? You practically ran out of here." I kept my expression neutral. "What makes you think I had a date?" She rolled her eyes. "Please. The dress, the extra makeup, the way you kept checking your phone." "I have eyes, Emma." I shrugged, trying to seem casual. "It was fine. Nothing special." "Uh-huh." Her tone made it clear she didn't believe me. That's why you're glowing like you swallowed the sun. Was I? I hadn't noticed, but now that she mentioned it, I did feel different, lighter somehow, as if gravity had slightly loosened its hold on me. Just had a good night's sleep, I lied. Right. Sleep. May winked. Well, whoever he is, he's good for you. I haven't seen you smile this much in, ever, actually. After she left, I wondered what May would say if she knew the truth. Would she be shocked? Disappointed? Or would she understand how something that looked so wrong on paper could feel so undeniably right? At 2:58, I gathered the projection folder and headed to David's office, my heart racing with anticipation. Vanessa glanced up as I approached, her expression unreadable. He's expecting me, I said, trying to sound purely professional. She nodded. Go ahead. David was on a call when I entered, but he gestured for me to sit. I closed the door behind me and took a seat across from his desk, watching as he wrapped up what sounded like a contentious negotiation. In his CEO role, he was commanding, authoritative, so different from the tender, passionate man who had held me through the night. When he hung up, his entire demeanor changed. The mask dropped, and suddenly he was my David again, eyes softening as they took me in. Hi, he said simply, his voice warm. Hi. He moved from behind his desk to sit in the chair beside mine, close enough that our knees almost touched. I've been thinking about you all day. Me too, I admitted. It's hard to focus. I know. He glanced at the closed door, then back to me. But we need to be careful here. Vanessa suspects something. I nodded, remembering the way his assistant had looked at me. What do we do? David reached for my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. We compartmentalize. At work, we're professional, no lingering looks, no private meetings unless absolutely necessary. Outside. His grip tightened. Outside, you're mine. The possessive note in his voice sent a shiver through me. And when do I get to see you outside? His smile was slow and full of promise. Tonight. Tomorrow. Every night you'll let me. It was reckless, this arrangement. If anyone discovered the truth, the consequences would be severe, for both of us, but especially for me. Office gossip, professional reputations, future career prospects, all were at risk. The sensible thing would be to end it now, before we were in too deep. But as David leaned forward to brush his lips against mine in a stolen office kiss, I knew it was already too late for sensible decisions. We were already in too deep, and there was no going back, only forward into the secret world we had created together. Your place tonight, he whispered. I'll bring dinner. I nodded, unable to form words as his lips moved to my ear, his breath warm against my skin as he told me exactly what else he had planned for the evening. When I left his office 10 minutes later, the projections completely forgotten, Vanessa's knowing look followed me down the hall. But I couldn't bring myself to care. I was living in a dream state, floating through my carefully ordered life with a secret that made everything else fade into insignificance. That night, as David lay beside me, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder, I knew that what we were doing was dangerous. But for the first time in my life, danger felt like freedom. 2 months into our secret relationship, I realized I was falling in love with David. It wasn't just the physical connection, though that remained as intense as ever. It was the way he'd call me late at night just to hear my voice, the coffee he'd have waiting on my desk some mornings with no note or explanation needed, the way he listened when I spoke as if my thoughts were precious gifts. We had settled into a rhythm that somehow worked, despite all the reasons it shouldn't. At the office, we maintained a careful professional distance, our interactions cordial but never crossing any visible lines. No one would have guessed that most nights we fell asleep in each other's arms, sharing dreams and fears and everything in between. David had begun to open up about his marriage, how it had crumbled slowly, two people growing apart until they were essentially strangers living parallel lives. I was lonely even when we were in the same room, he confessed one night, his head resting on my chest. I didn't realize how lonely until I met you. These quiet moments of vulnerability touched me more deeply than the passion. David Preston, The confident CEO who commanded every room he entered, allowing me to see his doubts, his regrets, his hopes. It felt like a privilege I hadn't earned but desperately wanted to deserve. One evening as we sat on my balcony, sharing wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, David turned to me with unexpected seriousness. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you." My heart stuttered, anxiety immediately flooding my system. This was it, I thought, the moment he would end things, tell me it had been fun but it was time to move on. I braced myself, forcing a calm expression. "I've been offered a position in London. The board wants me to head our European expansion." This was worse than I'd imagined. Not just ending our relationship, but leaving the country entirely. I struggled to breathe, to think. "When?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. 3 months from now. It's a 2-year commitment, minimum." The silence stretched between us as I processed this, tried to imagine my life without him in it. The thought was surprisingly painful, as if someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed. "I turned it down," he said quietly. My head snapped up. "What?" "David, that's a huge opportunity. You can't just." "I turned it down because I can't imagine being away from you." His eyes held mine, intense and serious. "I'm in love with you, Emma. I think I have been since that first kiss in my office." The words hung in the air between us, momentous and terrifying and wonderful. No one had ever given up something so significant for me before. The knowledge that he valued what we had built together more than his career ambitions shifted something inside me, broke down a wall I hadn't realized I'd been maintaining. "I love you too," I said, the words flowing naturally, inevitably. His smile was radiant as he pulled me into his arms. "Then we'll figure this out together." That night, something changed between us. The secrecy that had felt exciting now felt constricting. I wanted to walk beside him in public, to claim him openly as mine, to stop living this double life. "What if we went public?" I whispered as we lay in bed later. "What if we stopped hiding?" David propped himself up on one elbow, studying my face in the dim light. "Are you sure? There would be consequences. Office gossip, maybe worse." I nodded slowly. "I'm tired of sneaking around. I want a real relationship, not just stolen moments." He kissed me softly. "Then that's what we'll do. I'll talk to HR on Monday, disclose the relationship officially. We'll face whatever comes together." As I drifted off to sleep in his arms, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since our relationship began. Finally, we could stop hiding, stop pretending. Finally, what we had could exist in the light. I had no idea how difficult that light would be to face. The plan to go public with our relationship was set. David would speak to HR on Monday, I would tell May and my team on Tuesday, and by Wednesday, we would no longer need to hide. We spent the weekend in a bubble of anticipation, making plans and dreaming of a future where we could simply be together without the exhausting web of lies. Monday morning arrived, and I walked into the office with a nervous energy I couldn't quite contain. Today was the day everything would change. I sat at my desk, trying to focus on work while waiting for David to let me know he'd spoken with Rachel in HR. Around 11 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from him, "Meeting running long. We'll take care of HR after lunch. Can't wait to start our real life together." I smiled, tucking my phone away just as Jackson approached my desk. "Team lunch at Moretti's," he announced. "Client just approved the campaign budget, we're celebrating. You in?" I nodded, grateful for the distraction. Sure, I could eat. Lunch with the team was a welcome diversion, jokes and shop talk and excited discussion about the newly approved campaign. I was laughing at one of Taylor's stories when I glanced toward the restaurant entrance and froze. David had just walked in, and he wasn't alone. Catherine, his wife, estranged wife, I reminded myself, was with him, her hand resting on his arm as they followed the hostess to a table. "Emma? You okay?" May asked, noticing my sudden silence. "Fine," I said automatically, my eyes still locked on David and Catherine. They were seated now, heads bent close in conversation. I couldn't see David's expression from this angle, but Catherine was smiling, looking more relaxed and happy than I would have expected from a woman in the middle of a separation. Isn't that Preston? Jackson had followed my gaze. Who's the woman? His wife, May replied. They've been having problems, but maybe they're working things out. The casual comment hit me like a physical blow. Working things out? After everything David had told me about their failed marriage, after his declaration of love just days ago, was he considering reconciliation? I excused myself, heading for the restroom on shaky legs. Once inside, I leaned against the sink, trying to calm my racing heart. There had to be an explanation. Maybe this was a final meetup to discuss divorce details. Maybe Catherine had insisted on seeing him. Maybe, the door opened, and Catherine herself walked in. She paused when she saw me, recognition flickering in her eyes. We had met at company functions before, back when I was just David's employee, nothing more. Emma, right? She said pleasantly. You work with David. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He speaks highly of you, she continued, moving to the mirror to check her lipstick. Says you're one of the most talented people on his team. I mumbled a thank you, desperate to escape but trapped by politeness. Catherine turned to face me directly. Actually, I'm glad I ran into you. David mentioned you've been working closely with him on some special projects. I wanted to thank you for that. It's given him something positive to focus on during a difficult time. The irony of her gratitude was almost unbearable. I managed a tight smile. The separation has been hard on both of us, she continued, seemingly oblivious to my discomfort, but I think we're turning a corner. Sometimes you need distance to remember what's important. My heart sank. This wasn't a divorce meeting. This was reconciliation. I excused myself as quickly as politeness allowed, returning to my team's table with my mind in chaos. Through the rest of lunch, I couldn't stop myself from glancing at David and Catherine, noticing the easy familiarity between them, the way she touched his hand occasionally, the way he leaned in to hear her better. Back at the office, I waited for a text, a call, any explanation. Nothing came. At 5:30, I was packing up to leave when David appeared at my desk. My heart jumped. Finally, an explanation. Got a minute? He asked, professionally neutral. I followed him to an empty conference room, closing the door behind us. You saw me at lunch, he said without preamble. With Catherine. Yes. It's not what you think. She seems to think you're reconciling, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. David ran a hand through his hair. She wants to try again. I told her I needed time to think. The words landed like a blow. Time to think? After everything you said to me? Emma, it's complicated. We have history, children, and did you tell HR about us today? I interrupted, already knowing the answer. His silence was confirmation enough. I see, I said, a strange calm settling over me. So much for starting our real life together. The week after seeing David with Catherine was excruciating. He kept trying to explain, to assure me that he wasn't considering reconciliation, that he just needed time to handle the situation delicately. I wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root, growing stronger with each passing day. She surprised me with that lunch, he insisted during a stolen moment in his office. I didn't know she was planning to suggest we try again. And what did you tell her? I asked, keeping my distance despite his attempts to draw me closer. That I needed time to think, but that I didn't see how we could go back. But you didn't tell her about me. It wasn't a question. David sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now saw as a sign of his uncertainty. No, I didn't. It would only hurt her unnecessarily. And what about hurting me? The words escaped before I could stop them. More vulnerable than I wanted to be, his expression softened. Emma, please. I'm trying to handle this properly. Give me a little time. I wanted to trust him, to believe that what we had was real and lasting. But the seeds of doubt, once planted, were difficult to uproot. To complicate matters further, the atmosphere at work had shifted. Vanessa's cool suspicion had evolved into outright hostility, evidenced in small ways, forgetting to relay my messages to David, scheduling meetings during times she knew I was available, excluding me from communications I should have been part of. "You've made an enemy there," May observed after witnessing a particularly frosty exchange between Vanessa and me. "What did you do, steal her stapler?" I forced a laugh. "Who knows? Maybe she's just having a bad month." But we both knew it was more than that. Vanessa had worked with David for years, was fiercely protective of him, and had clearly decided I was a threat. Then came the conversation with Rachel from HR that confirmed my worst fears. She called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon, her expression grave as she gestured for me to sit. "Emma, I want to talk to you about something sensitive," she began, her tone deliberately neutral. "It's been brought to my attention that there may be some boundary issues between you and David Preston." My stomach dropped. "Boundary issues?" Rachel's gaze was steady. "There have been concerns raised about the nature of your professional relationship. Late-night meetings, unusual levels of communication, certain behaviors that might suggest more than a standard employer-employee dynamic." "Who raised these concerns?" I asked, though I already knew. "That's confidential," Rachel replied smoothly. "I'm not here to make accusations, just to remind you of our company policies regarding relationships between managers and their reports." She slid a copy of the policy across the desk to me. The key section was highlighted: "All romantic or sexual relationships between managers and their direct or indirect reports must be disclosed to Human Resources immediately." "I'm sure there's nothing to discuss," Rachel continued, watching me closely, "but I wanted to make the policy clear. Undisclosed relationships represent a significant conflict of interest and can lead to termination for both parties." The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Someone, Vanessa, most likely, had reported suspicions about David and me, and now HR was watching. "Thank you for clarifying," I said, standing to leave. "But there's nothing to disclose." The lie felt bitter on my tongue, but what choice did I have? David hadn't been ready to go public, and now it seemed the decision might be forced upon us. I texted him immediately, "We need to talk." "HR knows," his response came quickly, "my office." 5 p.m. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching endlessly as I contemplated the increasingly precarious position we were in. By the time 5 p.m. arrived, I had cycled through anger, fear, and a strange resignation. Whatever happened in David's office would determine not just our relationship, but my entire career. When I entered, David was standing by the window, silhouetted against the setting sun, his posture tense. He turned as I closed the door, his expression grave. "Rachel called me in too," he said without preamble. "Vanessa went to her with concerns." "What did you tell her?" "The truth." He moved closer, taking my hands in his. "That we have feelings for each other but haven't acted on them." Another lie. I pulled my hands away. "So what now?" "We need to be more careful," he said. "Just for a little while, until things settle down with Catherine and the timing is right." The words hit me like ice water. More secrecy. More waiting. More being the hidden woman while he figured things out with his wife. "Emma," he said, reaching for me again, "I love you. You know that. This is just temporary." I stepped back, suddenly seeing everything with painful clarity. The secret meetings, the compartmentalization, the constant promises that someday things would be different. It was a pattern, not a temporary situation. "I think," I said slowly, finding strength I didn't know I had, "that I deserve more than being your secret." "Emma, please." David's voice cracked slightly as he reached for me again. "You know it's not that simple." "It could be," I said, standing my ground. "If you really wanted it to be." We stood in silence, the setting sun casting long shadows across his office. Outside, the regular rhythms of the workday continued, phones ringing, distant conversations, the hum of printers, while inside, something was breaking apart. "I need to think about my kids," he said finally. "If Catherine and I can find a way forward, even just as co-parents." "Stop." The word came out sharper than I intended. Just stop. This isn't about your kids. This is about you not being willing to choose. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Isn't it? I could feel myself trembling, months of hidden emotions suddenly bubbling to the surface. You've been telling me you love me, that what we have is special, that you want a future with me. But when it comes to actually doing anything about it, you hesitate. You delay. You find excuses. They're not excuses, he insisted, running a hand through his hair. There are real considerations here: my position in the company, the potential fallout, my children, and where do I fit into all these considerations? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Because right now, it feels like I'm just an afterthought. Something you enjoy in private but aren't willing to acknowledge in public. David moved to the window, his back to me. You know how much you mean to me. Do I? I crossed my arms, suddenly feeling cold despite the warmth of the office. Because your actions and your words don't match, David. You say you love me, but you're not willing to fight for us. He turned, his expression pained. I am fighting. Just not in the way you want me to. The words hung between us, heavy with all they revealed about the fundamental disconnect in our perspectives. To him, caution and secrecy were forms of protection. To me, they felt like rejection. I can't do this anymore, I said softly, the decision crystallizing even as I spoke the words. I can't keep being the woman you hide. What are you saying? Alarm flashed across his face. I'm saying it's over. The words hurt to say, but they also brought a strange relief. I need more than stolen moments and secret meetings. I need someone who's proud to be with me, not someone who treats me like a guilty pleasure. Emma, don't do this. He crossed the room in 2 quick strides, taking my hands in his. I love you. We can figure this out. I looked up at him, memorizing the lines of his face, the depth in his eyes, the way his mouth curved when he was earnest. I had loved this man with an intensity that surprised me, had risked my career and reputation for him. But I couldn't continue sacrificing my dignity and self-respect. I love you too, I said, gently freeing my hands from his. But sometimes love isn't enough. I gathered my courage and turned to leave, each step toward the door requiring more strength than I thought I possessed. As I reached for the handle, his voice stopped me. What if I tell Catherine tonight? What if I come clean with HR tomorrow? Would that change things? I paused, not turning around. Why now, David? Why not a week ago, or a month ago, or the first time we kissed? Why does it take me walking away for you to finally be ready? He had no answer, and that itself was answer enough. Goodbye, David. Walking out of his office felt like leaving a part of myself behind. I moved through the now empty halls on autopilot, grateful that most of the staff had already gone home. I didn't want anyone to see the tears I could no longer hold back. As I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed with a text from him. Please, Emma. Don't end this. I'll do whatever you want. Too little, too late. I thought but didn't write. Instead, I turned off my phone and rode the elevator down in silence, wondering how something that had felt so right could end up causing so much pain. I called in sick the next day, unable to face the thought of seeing David or pretending everything was normal. I needed space to process what had happened, to begin the difficult work of extracting him from my heart. But the universe had other plans. My doorbell rang at 10 a.m. Assuming it was a package delivery, I opened it without checking the peephole, a mistake I regretted immediately. Catherine Preston stood in my hallway, elegant in a cream-colored suit, her expression a carefully controlled mask of politeness. Hello, Emma, she said, her voice deceptively calm. I think we need to talk. My mind went blank with panic. How had she found my address? What did she know? I tried to compose myself, grasping for any semblance of normalcy. Catherine. This is unexpected. May I come in? She didn't wait for an answer, stepping past me into my apartment. Her gaze swept over the space, taking in the half-empty wine glass from the night before, the throw blanket rumpled on the couch, the framed photos on my shelves. I watched her, frozen between terror and resignation. "You have a lovely home," she said, but her eyes had stopped on something specific. I followed her gaze to my coffee table, where David's cufflinks lay gleaming in the morning light. He had removed them 3 nights ago and forgotten them. A small, damning detail. "How long?" Catherine asked, turning to face me. "How long have you been sleeping with my husband?" The direct question, stripped of any pretense, demanded an equally direct answer. 3 months, I said quietly. "But it's over now." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. 3 months. While he was telling me he needed space to think about our marriage. While he was having dinner with me and discussing reconciliation. Each word hit like a physical blow. "He was discussing reconciliation with you?" "As recently as last week," she confirmed, watching my reaction closely. "He said he thought we could try again, for the kids' sake." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Even after everything, even after our confrontation yesterday, I hadn't imagined David would continue to lie so completely. "I didn't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "No, I don't suppose you did." Catherine's expression softened fractionally. "He's very good at telling people what they want to hear." "I should know, I've been married to him for 17 years. She crossed to the window, gazing out at the city below. "You know what's ironic? I actually came here thinking you were the villain in this story. The young employee seducing my husband during our rough patch." She turned back to me. "But seeing your face just now, I think we've both been played." I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "How did you find out?" "About us, I mean." Anonymous email. "Someone sent me photos of you two at Riviera, looking very much not like boss and employee. They also helpfully included your home address." "Vanessa," I said immediately, the pieces falling into place. Catherine nodded. "David's assistant. Always had a thing for him, though he never noticed. Or pretended not to." We sat in uncomfortable silence, two women connected by their love for the same duplicitous man. Finally, Catherine spoke again. "I came here ready to confront the woman who was trying to steal my husband. But now I'm wondering if we should both just let her have him." The unexpected solidarity in her words loosened something in my chest. "I ended it yesterday," I said. "For what it's worth." "Good for you." She straightened her shoulders, smoothing her already perfect hair. "I'll be doing the same, as soon as I leave here." Catherine picked up her purse, moving toward the door with the dignified grace I had always associated with her. But she paused with her hand on the knob. "You know, the worst part isn't the affair," she said softly. "It's the lying. The way he made both of us feel like we were special, like we were the only one who really understood him." She glanced back at me. "Don't let him do that to you again." After she left, I sat motionless on my couch, trying to process the surreal encounter. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Where are you? We need to talk." For the first time, I saw his words for what they truly were, not love, not commitment, but manipulation. I deleted the message without responding. An hour later, May called. "You need to come in," she said, her voice tense. "All hell has broken loose here." I walked into Preston Marketing for what I knew would be the last time. The office was unnaturally quiet, conversation stopping as I passed through, all eyes following me with a mix of curiosity and pity. Clearly, news traveled fast. May intercepted me before I could reach my desk, pulling me into an empty conference room. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. "Rachel from HR is looking for you. Vanessa is smugger than a cat with cream, and David's office has been locked all morning with the blinds drawn." "It's a long story," I sighed, suddenly exhausted by the weight of it all. "I've got time," May said, crossing her arms. So I told her everything, from that first late-night summons to my confrontation with David yesterday to Catherine's surprise visit this morning. May listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to sympathy. "Damn," she said when I finished. "I knew something was happening between you two, but I had no idea it went this deep." Neither did I, apparently, I replied with a bitter laugh. A knock on the door interrupted us. Rachel from HR stood in the doorway, her expression grave. Emma, I need to speak with you in my office. I followed her silently, feeling like a condemned prisoner taking the final walk. In her office, a formal letter of termination already waited on the desk. The language was clinical and precise: violation of company policy, failure to disclose a conflict of interest, irreparable damage to professional relationships. David? I asked, not needing to complete the question. Rachel's expression softened slightly. He's been asked to take a leave of absence while the board decides next steps. His position is complicated. Of course it was. He was the CEO, the face of the company. I was just an employee, replaceable. The unfairness of it stung, even though I had expected nothing less. You'll receive 3 months severance, Rachel continued. And the company won't contest unemployment benefits. A small mercy, but it wouldn't repair my damaged reputation or ease the pain of everything I'd lost. I signed the paperwork mechanically, feeling strangely detached from the process. As I packed my desk, May hovered nearby, helping me sort through years of accumulated files and mementos. What will you do now? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. Start over, I guess. Just as I was placing the last of my belongings into a cardboard box, my phone buzzed with a text. David again, please let me explain. Meet me tonight. I need you. I showed May the message. Are you going to go? She asked quietly. 6 months ago, even 1 day ago, the answer would have been yes. I would have gone running at his call, desperate for any explanation that would let me keep loving him. But Catherine's words echoed in my mind, don't let him do that to you again. No, I said, surprised by the certainty in my voice. I'm not. I deleted the message and blocked his number. Walking out of Preston Marketing for the last time felt like emerging from a long dream. The air outside was crisp and clear, the autumn sun warm on my face. I had lost my job, my reputation, and a man I thought I loved. But standing there on the sidewalk, cardboard box in my arms, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. 6 months later, I sat in a cafe across town, reviewing the business plan for my new marketing consultancy. The first few months had been hard: rejection from potential employers who had heard rumors, financial strain as my severance ran out, nights spent questioning every decision I'd made. But slowly, I had rebuilt. My phone chimed with an email notification, another client referral from May, who had become my most vocal supporter. She had eventually left Preston Marketing too, unwilling to stay in what she called a toxic environment. We now collaborated regularly, forming a partnership that played to both our strengths. I'd heard through industry gossip that David and Catherine had finalized their divorce, that he had taken a position with a competitor after the board forced him out, that Vanessa had followed him there. None of it mattered to me anymore. The affair that had once consumed my every thought now seemed like a chapter from someone else's story, painful, yes, but also instructive. I had learned my worth, my boundaries, my capacity for both love and self-respect. I had discovered that sometimes walking away, however difficult, is the most powerful choice you can make. As I closed my laptop and gathered my things, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the cafe window. I looked different now, stronger, more confident, my eyes clearer than they had been in years. I smiled at my reflection, remembering how far I had come. The woman who had walked into David's office that night, desperate for approval and afraid to break rules, was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that true freedom comes not from breaking rules for someone else, but from writing your own.